Next up, we have Jimmy Sanders. He is the head of information security at Netflix DVD. And for those that are not aware, Netflix is infamous for having one of the most forward-thinking and innovative cyber programs out there. And that doesn't happen without leaders like Jimmy at the helm. He is the president of the Bay Area ISSA chapter. And we actually met about a year ago when he was co-hosting a podcast that I had a chance to be a guest on. I'm honored that we could get him on our show or on our forum or summit today and get him to share his insights with us. Jimmy, it's all yours, man.
Hey, thank you for having me. And I see that I'm a little dark. Let me fix that 1 second, and then we can get started. Perfect. Okay, here we go. So it's great to be here. Jarek, I love your movement. I love what you're doing. Sands, thank you for the invite. Hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear. Yeah. So the topic today, evolution over iteration. And I'll get to exactly what that means shortly. Because for me, security is not just doing security, it's how do we enable the business? How do we actually accelerate the business? And I'll give a couple of examples of that as well. This topic is meant for everybody. It's not, me speaking from above or hopefully from an echo chamber, because I will try my best to leave some time at the end, even though I have a few slides, to be able to answer any questions you may have. So this is for open-minded audiences. I don't pertain or claim to have all the answers. This is not ISSA or Netflix or any other entity put me up to, spew these thoughts or state my opinions. These are my observations and my experiences as well. Okay. So just a little about me. As Jarek said, I'm the president for the San Francisco ISSA chapter. I'm also on the board of ISSA International and a few other organizations. And for my day job, I run security at Netflix DVD. And it's great to be here. And so with this level of experience, I've had different iterations of understanding what I mean by evolution over iteration. And so I'll give you a perfect example right now. But before we even get started on that, just a public service announcement that I like to talk about that I see happening in security over and over again. And what that simply is that we, and I'm saying the collective we, and that's security. Many times we're always saying how users are the weakest link, or users shouldn't have clicked on this, or users did this, or users, you fill in the blank. The one thing I push back on anybody who makes that statement is go back to the security architect. Go back to the person who designed that. Why did you even allow that to happen? So don't always blame the user. Sometimes the user does things and, there is phishing and there are things that may cause issues, but the user isn't the weakest link. It may be actually your security design that's the weakest link instead. So let's get back to the program. I see that in so many presentations or in so many tweets about the user that it just drives me up a wall. So evolution over iteration. And what do I actually mean by that? And what I simply mean is that if you look back on our past security ideas, we used to build these roads, except these roads had these big barriers in place. And instead of us trying to help the business or enable the business, security just simply tried to limit risk by limiting the speed of change. You can't go that fast. You can't develop this fast. We would come up with a waterfall method that you could only do deployments once a week or once a month or once a day, right? And so what ended up happening is security became a disabler. We didn't enable the business, we disabled the business. We stopped them from innovating. And so one of the things that I do currently at ISA is I head up the Emerging Technologies Division, and I work on the Cyber Executive Forum. The other thing that I'm involved in, obviously, is at DVD.com, at Netflix. And we have what we call freedom and responsibility. And so what that essentially does is it allows me to take my ideas from emerging technologies It allows me to work with the cyber executives to hear what's on the mind of executives, and not just security executives, but also CIOs and CTOs and CROs. And then it also allows me, from my DVD perspective, to put all that together. And what does that mean for you? What I always like to say is that instead of us thinking of security as the roadblock, we're on this information speedway where we're trying to go as fast as possible, faster than the speed of light in some instances. And our job in security is to put these disparate pieces together so that we can put the pieces of the puzzle together so that we can come out with the best security program, so that we can enable the business, so we can evolve faster and not just over iteration. And so this is what I mean by security becomes an integral part of the business. And so the big thing now is to talk about present security ideas. And so I shared the picture earlier of how security used to limit the speed of change. Now, in a lot of instances, in a lot of businesses, we try to practice this approach, and we call it rails over barriers. And that simply means we won't limit the speed of your development. We won't tell you that, oh, you can't develop as fast as you want. Oh, you can't do these things. We will put these guardrails in place so that you can have your business, as long as you follow along these rails or this paved path, you can develop 1,000 iterations, 100 iterations. The only thing that has to happen is your code need to align with certain values and certain security requirements. And as long as it does that, you can just keep it chucking. And so this goes back to DevSecOps. And what I always like to tell people is, the reason why we want to do DevSecOps, the reason why we want to evolve, is to get your security into the company's applications earlier in the process. The other big thing that happens when you start doing DevSecOps and you start doing it right is you get a certain level of openness, you get a certain level of transparency because you start talking to each other. You can see what's happening. Security starts working with the developers, and a communication and a flow comes together. But that was then. And now, luckily, we're living some interesting times, because look at us now. We're at the SANS meeting with thousands of people, and we're doing all of this virtually. And so one of the things that's happened, obviously, is our home environment and our work environment has melded and joined together in a lot of instances. In some cases, you still go to work, but the ideal of working from home is no longer as far-fetched, or it's a lot more commonplace now. But the one thing that's happened, and if you have a bug bounty program or if you have anything else that you will notice, is that the same way we're able to work from home now and work more often, because now you just roll out of bed and you start typing, the adversaries are doing the exact same thing. Bug bounties, vulnerabilities. If you've watched any of the news lately, you will think that security is just getting worse, when I would advocate that security isn't necessarily getting worse. What's happening is the adversaries are just working more often. Instead of them taking a big bug bounty and then going away on vacation, where's there to travel to with all the restrictions in place? So instead of them being able to cash out on a bug bounty or to stop, attacking, they have to just stay in front of the computer. And if that's what you do for a living, you just sit there and you just work on it more. And so the other big thing that you will see and that we've seen is the supply chain issues. And this is, for us, where security needs to understand this as well. We see this corruption that's currently happening in the supply chain issues. We see the deception that can happen in the supply chain issues, where I've seen the chips, because now there's this chip shortage, people are using fake chips. So instead of it being a real AMD chip, it's a AMC chip, for instance. The other big thing that you will see that the adversaries are doing is simply disrupting the supply chain. Because for them and for certain adversaries, when your business goes down, that may mean their business goes up. So supply chain issues have hit the news, has hit our security environment a lot. So what does that even mean? what I mean is that, and what I'm getting to, is that security is starting to enable a business, because before these interesting times happened, the thoughts of zero trust were new, archaic, or not archaic, but something that was thought of that another company does, that somebody else does. And now zero trust and certain aspects of zero trust are going to be with us to stay. And this is how security will enable the business. Traffic segmentation. We've been doing traffic segmentation for a while, from VLANs to understanding PCI environment, but now we're doing information segmentation along with that. And what I mean by that is that not everybody needs access to the same type of information. And because everybody's living in a virtual world, we may not even know what location you're coming from. So we need to segment the traffic, segment the information. The other big thing about zero trust that we're starting to do is discrete privilege allocation. And what I mean by discrete is that simply not every developer needs access to this level of code. I'm seeing companies implement certain models where certain developers push to this code tree, another set of developers push to this code tree, and you have these code trees pushing the same code, but you're doing checksums on each of those codes. So that if either one of those gets compromised, you're able to immediately stop that branch of code and use the one that's clean. And so that can help stop certain code attacks that we've seen in the news from various companies when attackers embed, backdoors into the code. The other big thing about zero trust, and this is the thing that I want everybody to grasp, is that verify, and then finally trust. It's not verify, then trust. Because we don't necessarily know where people are coming from. We don't even know if that's a real person on the other end of it. My name can say Jimmy Sanders in Zoom, and I can change that easily to, Jamie Sanders or what have you. And so we need, when we implement zero trust, is to ensure that our verification process is robust, multi-factor authentication. And then obviously not obviously, but the big thing as well is assume breach. So many times when when we used to just do iterative security approach, we would build firewalls and we would have a nice hard outer surface, and we would build the office, and we would have all these other tools in the office. But what we really had was a soft middle, where if an attacker got into our environment, we trusted all of our employees. We would say, oh yes, that's Jill from across the hall, she's a great person. But now in this era where we're working from home, you don't know who the person is that's coming in. Yes, you tried your best to verify, but assume breach. That way you can not be startled when something happens. It doesn't mean don't fight, because I'll see people say, oh, assume your breach, so what's the point almost? And for me, it's like, I'm never gonna not fight, but just assume that. And so one of the other examples that I love to use is how security is enabled in business, and how we're going from an iterative approach to an evolutionary approach. And at least for my company, we used to use VPN just to log into the network. Oh, we're working from home today. Oh, we're trying to do a quick amount of work. Let me just use my VPN really quickly. Now, we're looking at VPN in a whole new light. VPN is taking another level of authentication. It's become more enhanced and more adaptive. And what I mean by that is that we're taking all of the data that we used to get from a regular VPN connection, and now we're feeding that information, and we're doing health checks on the laptops. We're installing firewalls on the endpoints itself, and not just relying on the firewalls from our environment. We're having monitoring devices so that customer service has always been monitored for the work that they used to be monitored in the office. We're taking those same things and we're bringing them down to a micro scale. And we're also doing that for telemetry data of, is this a healthy laptop? Is this a safe laptop? Is it secure? And so now we're taking that data, and now that it's filtered, we take the filtered data and we say, yep, this is a good laptop. Because you could do that again. You could say, I'm going to take all this data and assume that that's a bad laptop. Not assume that that's a bad laptop, but any one of these data points can show you different information at any one point in time. And that's the change that we've seen just in VPN alone. That just used to be just let me connect to the office. Now this is the lifeblood to ensure that my employees are being safe, that they're actually using the right rules, that attackers haven't compromised their system. And this is, to me, how VPN is enabling the business and not just another tool that security is using. So, but that's, what we're currently doing. And for me, I'm always focused on what's next. And so one of the big things that I try to iterate to a lot of security leaders and a lot of IT leaders is security, IT, we're always involving. And so for me, what I try to do with me and my team, and I try to advocate this to other security leaders, is you need to try new things. And so where I work, we generally do about a proof of concept a month. And this isn't just a proof of concept for something that's archaic or just some pie in the sky type of tool. We never know if we have the best tool unless you're comparing your tool or you're evolving your practice. And one of the things that you will get when you start testing out new tools all the time is your team gets a certain level of agility. It doesn't become hard for them to move out a firewall. It doesn't become a fire drill every time you want to do a change, because you're doing changes all the time. It's just part of the day-to-day job. The other big thing that this does is it helps align experiences. Because by doing multiple proof of concepts or by implementing new tools, your team and the personnel around your team can start getting training on the new tools. So you start getting training on Docker, you start getting training on Kubernetes, you start getting training on SIM technology or what's next around the corner. And that way you have the agility and experience on your team so that your team is constantly evolving, security is constantly evolving, and it's not just slowly getting better. You're not just doing security the way you did it yesterday. And so this is another example that I always try to say about evolution over iteration, is that the old iteration used to be, we would take a log file, we'd take an IP address, we'd take a host name, and we'll take this other information, and we'll put that together and we'll start searching for it, and we'll start trying to put the pieces together. And when you first get into it, you don't realize that you're doing that. Because when you first start your security practice, the first things you may have just a log file, and then you may have an IP address. And then what starts happening is over time, you start collecting more and more information, and you keep iterating. You keep saying, okay, now I'm gonna add host name. Now I'm gonna add, DNS information. Now I'm gonna add, time information. And you keep doing this. And one of the things that happens from your security practice is that you keep having these pieces that you keep adding on, but you're not actually moving the needle. You think you're moving the needle. And at the end of the day, there's so many times I hear security practitioners tell me, Jimmy, I'm so busy. We get so much data. I wish we did this. I wish we did whatever that next technology is. And the answer they always come back to me when I say, why don't you? Is because I'm too busy. We currently have this in place. We would have to redo everything. And to me, that's the whole point about being evolutionary, is take your old style and rip it out if it's not working properly. And that sounds harsh sometimes, but to think that you would still be doing 2 + 2 + 2 + 2, when simply you can just do 2 × 8, right? And so instead of just doing addition, we do multiplication. And then we take that to factors, and we keep evolving past that. And so don't keep thinking because you have a certain security stack, because you had your old firewall technology or your old antivirus technology, and you have these 3-year contracts and you have to be stuck with that. When bad things happen to your company, the attackers and the legislators aren't going to say, oh, well, they had a 3-year contract with this company and they couldn't change out, so we letting them off the hook. That's not what customers want to hear. So obviously, one of the big things that I advocate for in terms of pushing the needle is artificial intelligence. And so one of the things that I see happening in artificial intelligence is, instead of us taking those log files and that SIM data, you can push it all to these artificial intelligence entities, and they can pull together, do either supervised machine learning or true artificial intelligence, and they can come up with information for you. The big gotchas that I would tell you, though, about artificial intelligence is, if you can come up with the same, if you can look at the logic of an artificial intelligence system and get the same answer they did, that's not artificial intelligence. That's machine learning. True artificial intelligence doesn't think the way a human does. It thinks in a totally different way. So those are just some of the gotchas to think about when you're actually looking at artificial intelligence. The other thing that I advocate for is what I call threat forecasting, and many in the industry, we're calling it that as well. And what I mean by that is that now we, the security industry, is becoming more like other industries as well, where we have lots and lots of data. So we can use that black, example, and we would say, okay, this is IP intelligence data. The blue would be threat data from, external threat actors that may be coming to attack us. The orange may be, SIM data, and the green may be our user base. With enough data and with enough forecasting, we can say, we see this attacker, that they've been having a lot of chatter on the dark web. We understand that it's about November timeframe, and these attackers specialize in spear phishing campaigns and email campaigns. So instead of us just sitting back and being reactive and saying, we're going to just let them attack us, nope, we're going to go out. We're going to go out, and because we know it's November and they're getting ready to do a spear phishing attack on us, we're going to spend more money in this quarter on anti-spear phishing and anti-email fraud tools. Instead of waiting, we're going to be proactive instead of reactive. And to me, that's what threat forecasting is. You can take these examples, you can apply this to ransomware attacks. You can apply this to many things in your area, because one of the things that in the industry we realize is attacks don't just come out of the blue. They do reconnaissance, they do web chatter, they have to actually build systems themselves to attack you. They try to find out information about you. All the while these attackers are doing this to you, you can be gearing up your defenses proactively against them instead of waiting for them to attack. So the other big thing, and that's one of the great things I've loved about hearing about this talk that happened, prior to me presenting, is there's no one company or entity that's, suddenly doing everything great or doing everything amazing. We need the best ideas from everybody. And it's not just me, it's not just Netflix, it's not just DVD, or it's not just ISSA or SANS that's saying we're the leaders in the thought space. It's everybody. And so one of the big things that I always talk about that is that this is where security diversity really comes into play. Because one of the sad things that happened to me, not happened to me, but I was talking to a lady, and this is the iteration approach over the evolution approach. This lady, she had a dialect. She's native English speaker with a dialect. And she said, Jimmy, every time I use my mapping app, it always misunderstands me. And it can't really pick up my dialect. And this is a dialect that's used by millions of people in America. And it boggled my mind, because how is it that we're not evolving, but doing these iterative techniques on mapping apps have been around for what, 12, 20, 30 years. Voice apps have been around for that long, and we still can't get an American dialect right. And so to me, that's a diversity problem, because if you actually have people in that dialect developing and working on those tools, I don't think we would have that problem. And so for me, security diversity means diversity in personnel, meaning not everybody from the same backgrounds, not everybody, has the same, come from the same university. And that also means diversity in tactics, because the way a non-American person thinks, the way a native Indian person thinks, the way maybe a Chinese person or another country of origin thinks may be totally different than the way we think in America. So by understanding that diversity means a diversity in your tactics, your techniques, and your personnel, so that you can have a well-rounded, holistic security program, instead of just we get attacked by the same ideas over and over again. Oh, well, Gartner said that this was in the magic quadrant, so this is what we should use. Nope, that is not diversity. It may be the right tool for you, but it's up to you to figure out your personnel, your tactics, and your techniques to see what works best. So, as I was saying before, all ideas are welcome. It's not just my idea. It's not just Jarek's idea or Sam's idea or Dutch's idea. It's everybody's idea. Because for me, we won't get better and we won't evolve unless we get increased diversity. And that's not just increased diversity in terms of personnel, that means tactics and techniques. Also, we need more security champions and advocates, so that when security isn't in the room, when security isn't upstage talking, we have people in the development community, we have peers in the executive team that are championing security, that is advocating for security when we're not around. The lastly thing that, not lastly, but the other thing that I want to iterate is we need interconnectedness. If anything about these interesting times that I realize is the people who accelerated the fastest were the people who had the best networks. How do you implement zero trust? So instead of you falling for things that you could have learned about from the steps of other people or from the shoulders of other giants, you try to reinvent the wheel. Where if you had a great network, if you had the interconnectedness, you could have learned from their mistakes before you even got to those mistakes. So that was for me, evolution over iteration. I want to thank Sands. I want to thank everybody for allowing me to speak, and perfect time for questions.
Jimmy, thank you for your take on the evolution and iteration. And you ended with, you know, leverage your network, don't recreate the well. And you talked about topics that me and you have had more than one conversation about: zero trust, diversity. I wanna hone in on the users are not the weakest link, because that's how you started it off, and I think that was a perfect start to why we need to take into consideration all the things you just said. When someone hears that users are the weakest link, how should they respond, assuming that it is a security person, so that they're not necessarily beating down the team but encouraging the team?
Yes. So I would try my best not to be abrasive in my response, but the first thing I would say is, you're saying users are the weakest link, but I would come back with, what inputs did you get in the creation of this product? Because if you didn't get a diverse group of people thinking about this, then that's how you come up with a lot of security people thinking security terms. And by not bringing everybody into the room, and that may mean the executive assistant, that may mean customer service, when you're first implementing this idea, then you won't come out with these things called stupid ideas. You'll come out with, oh, I didn't think of that. Because guess what? The way we don't think about it, somebody's thinking about it.
Absolutely. We actually have a question in here around, you talked about building guardrails. What is some practical tips and advice on the types of guardrails to build, or how to build some guardrails?
Yeah. So it's to advise and guide and not tell. And so what I mean by that is that we will advise and guide them to say, we want to ensure that your code adheres to not having any of the top 10 OWASP vulnerabilities. We want to ensure that your code doesn't have any high P1 vulnerabilities or high priority vulnerabilities. Now, you can have some mediums and you can have some lows and they can still get through. But as long as you don't have any critical vulnerabilities, just keep going, just keep developing, because hopefully we're going to be developing faster than attackers can catch our mistakes. But if obviously you have a 0-day or something high, we need to stop that. And so by giving advice and by giving guidelines like that, then you're not telling a developer you have to develop in Java, you have to develop in C++, you have to develop in C#. You're just giving them the guidelines or the guardrails to develop in the way that they see fit. And we'll just build these guardrails around that.
Great point. Great point. And going back to zero trust, I think it's the buzzword. Everyone's heard a lot about it these days. But some people think that it's just too large of a task to embark upon.
Yeah.
What is one thing that someone can start on if they want to, pursue the framework of zero trust?
So the one thing I would advise people is understand what are your most valuable assets and what are your most privileged assets. And a lot of times one of the things is you may have a repository of data and you can start there, but generally you would also want to start in your authentication system, because anytime your authentication system is compromised, then it's game over. So first, ensure that your whatever authentication you may have, it may be LDAP, it may be AD, it may be Google authentication, whatever that is, you have to lock that down. And then once you get that locked down, then you can start. So you start building these circles of trust. You build a circle that you trust implicitly, and then you branch out from there. And to me, that's the best way to start zero trust or go down the zero trust path.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that every framework starts off with know your assets, asset management. That is a perfect end to this. Jimmy, thank you for your time. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for being willing to share your thoughts and where you see the future of cybersecurity.